Yes, thank you, Tessa. Good morning. Tessa said come and talk about, for 10 minutes or so, around this topic. I'm not sure I'm actually going to do that. The title of today's session was Structures, Challenges, Possibilities, and this is about setting the scene. And I want to just give a few things over the next few minutes that perhaps have struck me over the last 20 or 30 years. I'm Leigh, I'm Deputy Principal for International and Graduate Studies at the University of Stirling. My professorial position, when I had time to do research, was retail studies. And I've spent 30 years looking at retail. And if you think about that, then one of the things that becomes fairly clear is that you can't, I don't think, do retail studies without having partnerships with business, understanding business and working with them a lot. So that colours an awful lot of what I want to try and say over the next few minutes or so. If I look at VTI data from Delhi, then 57% of our PhDs don't work in higher education. Well, that's round numbers, 60% don't. So what we're training people for, where they're going, how they're working, and where they end up has changed fundamentally over the last wee while. And we need to be cognizant of what we're trying to get people to do, where they might end up, the skills they therefore need in order to carry out the work that we might wish them to carry out more generally. And I'm not sure we've always reflected that in the way in which we think about the way we train through collaborative doctorates. Varies by subject, absolutely, and again this is fairly standard data, so it'll vary across the sector, and we saw quite an emphasis on STEM a minute ago. That leads us into the industrial side of various things. So my first point is a very simple one. What are we training people for as part of collaborative doctorates? Where are they ending up? What does that mean about how we structure things and how we work things through? Have we got that clear? The VTI definition, which I thought might be a useful place to start, was this: a generic term to cover doctoral degrees that involve research projects in collaboration or partnership with non-higher education organisations or businesses. And again, this goes to a narrative that I'm trying to think around, that it's a very narrow focus on the output, the degree, and the collaboration, possibly the research project. It's seen in a particular lens, in a particular way, that I think is rather narrow and not long-term enough and not broad enough. And we need, I think, secondly, therefore, to think about, when we talk about collaborative doctorates, what is the more important element of that? Have we switched enough from it being the doctorate to the collaboration? Do we need to say rather more about the nature of partnership and the nature of collaboration and what that actually involves? I'll give an illustration of that perhaps in a minute's time. So that's dropped off the bottom for some reason. There are a number from the research councils, and I apologise for this, I should have checked this beforehand when it's set up on this machine, but we've lost a few off the bottom there. But there is a fair degree of investment gone on over a long period of time, from the origins of case studentships through to a whole range of other studentships that are around. And we've seen these collaborative studentships, we've seen this investment in it around a whole range of different models and elements, and we're going to see bits of those models in other presentations. They're not going to focus on the individual models. I'll say there's a fair chunk of them through there, and other examples, which again we'll hear some of those today. The SRC, Scottish Graduate School for Social Studies, and I was on the supervisory board of that for a little while as these programs started, and Skills Development Scotland. And then if you look more recently, some of the European elements, which you may or may not get access to in a few years' time, but again, a range of things that are going on. So there's plenty of models out there. There's plenty of different ways of doing it, and different countries are doing it in different ways and different elements. And I'm not sure we fully learned across all of those what works and and what necessarily doesn't work. And how we're looking at that. The next theme, I went to a little bit of the literature. There's quite a bit of literature out there. But I thought some of the themes, and these chime to my own particular biases in some ways, is why these are selected. This is not a literature review in the sense of proper literature review. These are things I read fairly recently that I thought, yeah, that chimes with some of the things that I've been looking at over the past week. And this was a paper out of the Netherlands, and it drove that narrative of the university being seen as competitiveness for the country and competitiveness around what we might do with the industrial strategy and industrial elements. So that chimes perhaps with what we might be thinking about in terms of Scotland. But much of this is around the ability to put things together, universities and businesses, in the broader sense of businesses, to actually allow better access. And that this paper also started talking about the students and where they might end up, which again, as you gather from the other slide, feeds into my point around what the career is, but quite interestingly focused on the role conflict of the student having these two different bodies, the sense of what is the university wanting out of them and what is the partner wanting out of them, and how those two things fit together. And I think that can be quite a challenge, particularly if you think where people are going to be ending up. So those different domains of practice and research do have different elements to it. More recently, in the last few weeks, a paper out of Sweden that said these sorts of things, that again the same theme about knowledge, growth, innovation, that the outcomes for the firms in the broader sense again, not just being commercial organisations, but that what they were gaining out of it was issues around their competency, the new programmes and new ways of thinking, processes within it. Something around seeing academia as providing some legitimacy for the business. But the one I thought was quite interesting was that this idea of actually being involved in these sorts of collaborations didn't just have the collaboration with the university, but also helped the collaboration across the business organisations, across the networks of the business side of it. So often we think about collaboration as bilateral, two-way, but actually it's much more broader than that, and maybe we're not exploiting that in the way we might exploit that in terms of thinking around clusters. And I'll show an illustration from my own example from that in a minute. But also, and this might be one of our challenges, a piece around the formalisation of the process. What do we mean by collaboration? How does that fit together? And they focused on issues around time for the researcher, issues around the contract itself. I know from my position in Stirling that's been an issue, and some of the IP issues come up around the elements around that, but also something around the topic. And that feeds into this last of the three papers I wanted to pick on, that because partners have different strengths and aims, that actually what we think about in terms of collaboration does tend to vary. So that we might have issues around what is the output that's wanted. If we conceptualize it as the PhD, is that the only output? How are we doing that? How do we change that? Perhaps because the other organisation may want something different. How much time is the organisation willing to put in, and when can they put that time into the researcher? So how do we get the right interventions at the right time, the right collaboration at the right time? But for some organisations, what they're after is validation of things that are going on, whereas what we might be interested as academics is something to do with novelty and difference. So matching those two elements and issues around the whole priorities of the particular project. And maybe that gets us to think about things about how you manage that. So it's about collaboration. How does that start? What does it mean? How do you maintain it? How do you continue to keep that collaboration going? And over my 30-year history of, as I said, starting as retail studies, a number of those collaborations have fallen by the wayside, and we've had some disastrous experiences that haven't worked as well as the good ones that have. How do we think around whether it's about gaps or whether it's solutions? What are we being used for, perhaps, in some ways, and that ties into some elements of relevance. And in terms of this paper stroke blog post, Is it about exchange between the partners? Or occasionally, and the word there, robbers, is my word, not the word of the authors. Is it about exploitation of what a partner can bring? Current main collaborative PhD, I'm a supervisor on a PhD with a local data company. If any of you ever think about what's going on in places around retail vacancy, what the hell has happened to the BHS stores that have been closed, the company that does much of that analysis is the local data company. They've got lots of data around the place. And this is who I've got a collaborative PhD with through the SRC DTC. This grew up out of pre-existing work I did with Matthew, who was in charge of the LDC. So it wasn't that it was a project focused on an issue. It was a discussion around all the things that are going on. They have lots of this data, but they don't, as a small business, have the skills to actually exploit that data in certain ways. That's what we could bring to it, with new ways of thinking, new ways of doing elements to that. They're very keen to see it publicised. They're not really interested in the PhD. They're interested in the journey through that and the outputs that come from that process. That's what they were really interested with. They've refused in the past to work with other universities. They work with a range across the UK. They refused in the past to work with them because they saw them as simply wanting to grab the data and do stuff with it themselves. It's not a collaboration, it's not a partnership. So how do we build that degree of trust, relationship, all of those sorts of things? Since working with 2 or 3 different universities, we've gone into the SRC data centre. But on Thursday, I'll be down in Oxford, which again is one of the other partners. What LDC bring together is all of the academic and the business partners they have into a network. And one of the spin-offs is that idea of the businesses working together, the commercial parts, actually learning all the things around it. So it goes to that article around where are the benefits? Is it just a university benefit, or is it much broader than that? And how do we capture a sense of what's going on the business side, not just on the academic side? So, conclusions. So it's set 10 minutes. There are many good reasons for collaboration at all different levels. But I don't think we've thought through collaboration properly and really thought what it means. And it's not as straightforward as it might be. There's a huge opportunity there for us and for industry, the sector, and broader than that. But I don't think we've thought it through fully enough. And that some of the collaborations I've seen are much more about one-off exploitations, particular project and nothing else. Very narrowly constrained. I think that's something that we may well have to change. I think we've underestimated the network and cohort benefits, and I think we've underestimated the costs of doing that, and the time involved in doing that as well. So what does the new landscape mean in those sort of ways, and how does that tie in, as Faye said, to all of the various levels of local, place, regional, national, international development? Because we're going to be tasked with doing that. If we don't deliver it, I'm pretty sure someone else will be asked to deliver it in our stead. It was about challenges and practices. Hopefully that's given some thought to what might follow. And then we'll have a real example. Steve.
Thanks.